Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started. Glad to see tonight's turnout for what I think was probably a shorter time frame than we usually like to have events, not least for such a distinguished speaker. So it's great that we're able to pack the room. So I'm Jake Sherman. I'm the director of the Brian Urquhart Center for Peace Operations here at IPI, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event, part of IPI's Leading for Peace, Voices from the Field series. On this occasion, I'm extremely pleased to welcome Mr. Parfait Onanga-Anyanga, the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for the Central African Republic and head of the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in the Central African Republic, MINUSCA. SRSG Onanga has been a frequent guest and speaker at IPI, and it is my pleasure to welcome you back. And tonight he's going to share his views on the global peace agreement signed by the CAR government and 14 armed groups in Bangui on February 6th, as well as what he believes will be necessary for its sustainability in the months to come. As many of you will be aware, Mr. Onanga's tenure as SRSG and head of MINUSCA is also ending in 2 days' time, a role that he has formally held since January of 2016, and actually prior to that had been acting SRSG as of August 2015. So tonight is an opportunity for him to reflect not just on the recent peace agreement, but also on his long experience in CAR, and we hope that with 2 days to go, he will be extremely honest in his reflections. Following Mr. Onanga's remarks, which will be, let's say, on the order of around 20 minutes, we'll take questions and comments from the audience. So with that, please join me in welcoming Mr. Onanga. Perfect, please. As you wish, either from the podium or the seat.
So I'm tired. It's been a long day and a tough week, but maybe a tough 3 years and a half. And I'm so happy to see in this room some of my accomplices. Some of those were with me in Bangui, and absolutely happy to see you guys. And of course, some of them are been working from the HQ, and always happy to know that friends are around, and anything I would say which will look like inappropriate, we will share the blame because we did it together. But friends, really happy to see you, and it's not often that the Central African Republic is the subject of good news. And good news came on February 6th with the signing in Bangui of the political peace and reconciliation agreement, which, as you know, was negotiated in direct peace talks between the government and the 14 armed groups in Khartoum, Sudan, at the invitation of the AU, but hosted by the government and the people of Sudan, to whom we are immensely grateful. The talks were led under the framework of the African Initiative for Peace and Reconciliation in the Central African Republic, with the strong support of the United Nations in the context of the partnership, the strategic partnership between the UN and the African Union. Of course, as the SRSG for MINUSCA, I was privileged to be part of the facilitation based on a decision made by member state on September 2017 to ensure that having a peacekeeping to lead, it made a lot of sense to having the SRSG also playing a political role. And this was responding to the call of the Secretary General to ensure that the primacy of politics is really deeply, embedded in all our action on the ground, and having a clear understanding that there couldn't be any viability of any peacekeeping mission if it is not underpinned by a political process. So I do believe that there are reasons to celebrate, because negotiating a peace agreement with 14 armed groups it's never an easy task. But just to tell you a little bit about the process which was put forward, I mean, the African Initiative undertook, with the support of the MINUSCA mission, to consult all 14 armed groups over a period that spanned of about 12 months. They had a series of rounds throughout the huge territory of the Central African Republic. Armed groups were consulted. They expressed their grievances, their concerns. And on August 28th and 30th of last year, we brought them together in a city called Boar, where we made the effort to harmonize all the demands of armed groups into one single document, and which served, of course, as a basis for the government to respond and to try to see how they could meet the demands of these armed groups. And in January of this year, both the Under-Secretary General for Peace Operations, Mr. Lacroix, and his counterpart, Smail Chergui, from the African Union, the Commissioner for Peace and Security of African Union, consider that the terrain was maybe ripe to try to push this endeavor a bit forward. And on the condition, I welcome their move and say, fantastic, we indeed need that momentum. We need to have that step forward, but on the condition that you will be coming and providing us with a date and a venue for the negotiations, which they immediately seized and delivered on from 8th to 10th of January. They visited CAR, and the date was decided upon, 24th of February. The government of Sudan offered to welcome the participants, and we flew the entire group in two separate planes, the government on one plane and the armed groups on another airplane. And we found ourselves in Khartoum for 2 weeks from the 22nd. I just want to offer that for those who have been following CAR for a long time, it's almost natural to be skeptical and to wonder why this new agreement would be seen as a breakthrough, since we numbering maybe over 10 of previous efforts, which all failed and simply resulted in greater violence and loss of lives and despair. And I do believe that those who are skeptical today are not necessarily cynical. And I think we have to, to agree that CAR is not necessarily a place where hope has been, abundantly a shared kind of wealth. On the contrary, we only see misery. We still see violence that is, ravaging this country. We still see a huge number of IDPs. We still see a huge number of refugee people, and a nation where it's extremely difficult for any young person to hope for simply, a proper education, to hope for any future at all. And you just wonder why this, should this time, this agreement be seen as, a sign of hope that peace, sustainable peace will hold in CAR. Then you look at the landscape. For the first time, what has changed from previous similar endeavors is that for the first time, this agreement was negotiated by a legitimate government. This is part of the work we together made possible in CAR. CAR today is a truly democratic state, a weak state, but with democratic institutions. CAR produced some of the best credible elections, in years in the entire sub-region. Even the armed groups are not at all challenging the legitimacy of the national authorities that are in place. And that government said, and what is specific with the situation in CAR is that we don't have a war pitting the government forces against any rebellion. The state doesn't have any army. They could not go and engage any of the armed groups because they are still in a stage of, reforming the army, redesigning the structures. Command and control is still a challenge. Equipment is not easy. It's a country under an armed embargo. So all of these are constraints that, of course, prevent the state from having a strong Republican army. What is happening in CAR is a conflict that is ongoing between armed groups fighting for the control of natural resources, fighting for the control of lucrative commercial roads, and disputing that space to a totally absent state. Apart from Bangui, the city capital, the rest of the country is simply a bare, huge land lacking any government presence. It is simply thanks to the presence of the United Nations multi-dimensional mission that we're seeing a process through which we talk, politely about restoring state authority, but actually we should be talking about establishing state authority, because what we are been working on in CAR is simply the result of decades of total neglect and poor governance of a nation that has never enjoyed really any feature of a normal state the way we know it elsewhere. So what is changing is the presence of the United Nations, multi-dimensional mission, MINUSCA, which is providing the state with the security outfit. Of course, it is not perfect. I won't be lying and trying to suggest that everything is perfect. You so closely follow the news in CAR, and you're watching some of our limitations in this huge land where, unfortunately, IDPs are still subject to absolutely unacceptable violence in many parts of the country, with us being present but not in a capacity to protect the populations the way we would have liked to do it. But even when you take that into account, the main question is, thanks to the UN, we have protected this country from really going into chaos. And some, as you may be aware, have also spoken of the risk of genocide that has indeed threatened this nation. But because we are there, this has been contained. And I think the challenge for all of us today is to see how we move from containment to transformation. And we do believe that the peace agreement will be offering precisely this pathway towards, a brighter future for CAR. Now, so the UN there is indeed a reason for hope. And we already spoke about the democratic institutions that are in place, still weak, but still, present and making also a difference. And the third aspect that is different from the past is that we have here, for once, the entire international community joining hands and embracing this process. I spoke of the AU-UN partnership, strategic partnerships, but that's not the only reason for hope. We have the European Union being fully engaged, not only through their training mission, but also investing in the political process. We do have key major bilateral partners who have also throwing their weight and making sure that this time around things should be working differently. The region itself came together. The 8th to 10 January mission was undertaken by Mr. Lacroix and Mr. Shergi, was also backed by foreign ministers of the region, all going together and engaging with the government, engaging with armed groups, and paving the way for the talks that we held in Khartoum. And in addition to that, even though civil society organizations, political parties, youth organizations, women organizations were not part of the, they didn't have a deliberative voice in the negotiations. They would be part of the implementation mechanisms being established so that we have on the ground a fully inclusive process which will go beyond a simple peace agreement to offer the people of CAR an opportunity to address together in a non-violent way their grievances and giving the country a chance to really do what has never happened before. That is to see how they can build together the social contract. Because at the end of the day, it's about how a country that is fragmented, that has a diverse but rich population, could learn to live together and ensure that the dangers of divisions and instrumentalization of confession of identity will not be into play and continue to cause havoc the way it has done so far. So this is why we have today really reasons to hope, knowing that there will be challenges. And if you you read the agreement, please do read it. Take time. It's unfortunate so far it hasn't been translated into English yet. We're working on it. But the French text is absolutely rich. Read the preamble, read the principles that are really underpinning all this process. It's an innovative approach in which you see a full set of recommendations, engagement by the government and backed by engagement by the armed groups and supported by guarantors, partners, including the UN and the region itself, which will, if implemented in good faith by all partners, with us as witnesses, I do believe that there is serious ground, to hope for a better future. Now, I think, as in any agreement, there is always a temptation to go too fast, to have a very ambitious, agenda, hoping that in very short time frames we can fix deficiencies, structural deficiencies that have been there for decades. And this is a risk that we should avoid. But at the same time, there needs to be a momentum. We need to ensure that all the actors are quickly brought together, that initial decisions are made, and I'm pleased to see that the government has been so far, taking the right decisions. Article 21 in the agreement was making the point for the need of an inclusive government, and just yesterday, a new prime minister was appointed, and by Friday, we do hope that there will be bringing together a new government that would indeed reflect that hope. But we don't want this process to be, again, just an opportunity for new guys to come into government and to be part of the what they call in Bangui la mangeoire, meaning how to call this, will be convened and invited to share the small pie. I hope it will not be only that, but this is an important, feature that would make it easier to reestablish, to recreate trust, because without trust, no agreement will hold. And I think this is a critical phase, and I'm very glad to see that so far the president and the government have taken the right decisions. We will all be watching very closely what the next steps will be, and I do hope that whatever is in agreement, we could be seen as a challenge or as an hindrance into the effective implementation of the agreement, will only be seen will be considered as a challenge that could be overcome, but not as something that should hinder progress. So I am really confident that if, all of us continue to support this endeavor, knowing that one of the major risks for agreements is to lacking funding in support of the core decisions of the agreement. And Mr. Lacroix and others are really, as you might have been aware, on 22nd of February, they convened what is called a group of the International Support Group for CAR. They brought them together precisely to insist on the need to find quick strategic funding in order to back the decisions that are being made in the agreement. Another call was made at the meeting with the Security Council to see how flexibly MINUSCA's mandate could be, if need be, adjusted in order to allow the mission to support this endeavor. And I am absolutely hopeful that by working on these different work streams, we'll be able to support this country, knowing that it will not be an easy process. There will continue to be setbacks. Nobody is absolutely, how to put it, over-optimistic. There will be setbacks. We also know, for those who follow CAR, that most of the violence in the country, for 70% of violence in the country, has nothing to do with political agenda. It's simply criminality. And this is also another confirmation that we are having this state of affairs simply because the state is absent. And therefore, we will continue to do our work with regard to strengthening state capacities, advancing the DDR process, ensuring that the sector reforms programs are also underway, that the justice system is being reformed, And all of this together will continue to occupy the mission on the ground, the UN family on the ground, humanitarian actors on the ground, and so that all this will make it possible to hope for sustaining peace in CAR and maybe a brighter future for the country. I want to leave it at this point. I'm rather optimistic. I do believe that even though indeed I'm stepping down and moving on with my life, we have colleagues here who will continue to give the fullest support to this process, and the new leadership of the mission is fully aware of the need to realign the mission's mandate into supporting this peace agreement. And I am absolutely hopeful that we should be, even though we're entering into a very delicate phase where there are major risks surrounding the implementation of any peace agreement, I do believe that we now have a pathway where we could take CAR one step at a time towards a better future.
Parfait, thank you so much for those insights. And we're going to open things up for questions and comments from the audience. But I wanted to take the opportunity maybe to ask you an initial question before we do that, which is, you mentioned the statistic that 70% of the violence in the Central African Republic is actually around criminality, and there is quite a complex universe of criminal gangs, of militias that mutate. Some have very different goals. You mentioned natural resources. Not all of them are directly connected to the 14 groups that signed the peace agreement. And from what I understand, one area that MINUSCA actually has been quite active and in some ways quite innovative is around the local mediation, the local conflict resolution activity that the mission's been conducting. I wonder if you could say a bit more about how you see the connection between that local level conflict resolution that the mission is supporting and the efforts by the mission in the months ahead to support the peace agreement that's recently been signed.
No, thank you very much. And indeed, our assessment of the conflict dynamics in CAR very early on was clear to us that the nature of the conflict was locally driven, because armed groups are usually present in mineral-rich areas, and therefore this is where competition is taking place, and this is where violence and misery for the populations is also taking place. So therefore, we very quickly understood that as much as there was a need for us to have a peace process that was nationally driven, and to take away from these armed groups any justification whatsoever for the violence that was going on. What we usually hear from those armed groups is that we took up weapons because our region was neglected and we were marginalized, and therefore, there was a real, political necessity for us to take our own responsibilities and engage in this conflict. Even though we have very quickly realized that that discourse was not totally accurate, and that conflict was driven by rather competition over who controls the wealth. And therefore, it became absolutely important for us to ensure that wherever we are present, we could combine, and this is part of our own mission comprehensive strategy, that is to ensure that it's a whole of mission endeavor. Everywhere we are positioned, we should be ensuring that the military, the political, the civilian, our human rights component, our police component work together, and every head of office is being actually requested to develop an action plan that would, of course, enable the mission to achieve the mission's strategic objective, that is to reduce the presence and the threat that armed groups pose into the country, national institutions and civilian populations. And of course, the need for this comprehensive strategy is also to try to step away from the notion that MINUSCA is only a military outfit, and also the temptation that there is something called a military solution to the crisis in CAR. And again, this is nowhere to be true. There will not be any military solution to the crisis in CAR, but at the same time, I made it very clear that there will be no political solution that will be sustainable without, a sizable amount of force, legitimate force that is applied to ensure that both we can contain armed groups and also through our robust posture, we can coerce some of them into the negotiating table. So the peacekeeping mission there is really to create a conducive environment for dialogue. It's a political tool. It's not a military tool. And that's why we've been trying to explain time and again to all those who have been expecting the mission to just eradicate, militarily any kind of type of resistance on the ground. I've been saying that this is not peacekeeping mission. This is not peacekeeping. Peacekeeping is not meant to be fighting a war, even though because of the nature of the asymmetrical war, violence that has been imposed upon us, we have also to adjust and to be prepared to respond to the violence and to the deadly attacks that unfortunately have taken the lives of so many of our colleagues in the field, both our soldiers, but also humanitarian workers in CAR. So this is why it is extremely important to engage locally the populations, and those local engagement has helped here and there to, reduce the level of violence. And we have led some 11 such, local peace processes, and they have indeed contributed into the endeavor that we are taking at the national level. And because we have those structures, which we call, they're part of the peace committee, peace and reconciliation committees at the local level, this will be also the peace agreement will be actually implemented through those structures at the local level. But there shouldn't be also any, any consideration that local peace processes alone will fix the situation in CAR. That's not going to happen. You need to bring together both the local and the national levels together, and this is where we will continue to exert all efforts possible to promote indeed peace at the local level, but it will not hold in a context where the state is not present. And therefore, it is part and parcel of all our endeavors to ensure that we push further and further state authority, thanks to to the work of all of us, not only the mission but also the country team. We've been successful in re-establishing some kind of state presence. Prefect, that at the highest government authority at the local level have been now established in all 16 prefectures. Sub-prefects also are being present, and this endeavor is continuing. And we hope that part of the response will be what is also in the agreement, the enactment, very soon, of the decentralization law, which is still being considered by the Parliament, to ensure that responsibilities will be also shared at the local level to ensure that democratic culture could really take roots in CAR. So it is all of this together that really we hope will help to stabilize a still pretty shaky place. And I just want to offer on that note that we are really engaged in a very long endeavor in CAR. And some of you may be familiar with a strategic review that the Secretary General entrusted to a former Foreign Minister of Chile, Juan Gabriel Valdez. I will not be going to give you the details of his findings, but his work helped inform the decisions that the recommendation that the Secretary General put before the Council before the adoption of the last resolution 2448. But what is important in there is really to make the case that he himself made, that we want to have a force that is, a mission that is fit for purpose. And there is definitely some discrepancy between the daunting amount of work and challenges that CAR was facing with, the presence that, the outfit that we MINUSCA represent in the country. I want simply to say that while we highly appreciate the investment of member states, and this is $1 billion mission, it's not small. And as I said, it is thanks to that decision. This is maybe one of the best decisions ever made by the Security Council on that nation. It is an important investment. And as I said, people have died. We have lost peacekeepers. Humanitarian workers have also lost their lives. But that endeavor has enabled this nation to hold together. But again, maybe we need to do more. We need to invest more today so that tomorrow we may be able to envision some kind of exit strategy in which Central Africans will take, their shoulder, the brunt of the responsibilities on their own nation. But it's still a long way to go.
Great. Thanks so much. All right, we're going to open things up. I've got Evan in the back. And okay, so we'll go Evan, Matt, yeah. And we have about half an hour for Q&A.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Onanga-Anyanga. It's good to see you again. And thank you for your service with MINUSCA. It's been a long time following this mission, and I appreciate your efforts. I wanted to pick up on a few points that you raised and asked you if you could possibly reflect on how you balanced the demands to improve the performance of MINUSCA, particularly following allegations of underperformance in protecting civilians, as well as improving the safety and security of peacekeepers, given the attacks against peacekeepers in CAR, with the dwindling resources that the mission faced over the past few years, and what you think the Secretariat, the Security Council, and importantly, the Fifth Committee need to do to ensure that peacekeeping missions like MINUSCA, operating in a country like CAR, have the resources and capacities that they need to protect civilians. Thank you.
Why don't we take a couple? Matt?
Sure. Actually, it's Matthew Lee, Inner City Press. It sort of follows up on that, so I'll take it in a different direction. And thanks a lot for describing the political process and the agreement. I wanted to ask you about a different sort of the transparency of the mission. There's been a series of reports of sexual exploitation and abuse within the mission, back to Anders Compass, or even more recently, there have been pretty routinely, I would say about half of what they post on the SIA website of conduct and discipline are MINUSCA cases. And when I emailed them and asked, what happened to Cameroonian peacekeepers, alleged rape, et cetera, there's no answers. And so I'm wondering, do you think this has undermined in any way the credibility of the mission? What do you think? Who decides how much information should be given and what action should be taken? And the same thing, just to follow up on that, there have been these Amnesty International reports about specific cases in which they accuse peacekeepers of standing aside as civilians have been killed, and there hasn't really been. One of them was back in October. Are you aware of what's happened with the investigation of that incident? There's another one where Mauritanian peacekeepers were photographed swinging the corpse of somebody was never really explained. Maybe it was legitimate. I have no idea. If you could explain that one, it would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll in the front.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Danieli of the International Organization of Victim Assistance. I wanted to bring three aspects here: justice, education, and economic opportunity. You know that the Bemba case folded. This has been a bewildering aspect to all of us. And the victims, as a result, we don't know what will happen with them. We also know that from the justice point of view, there is the special criminal court. So would you comment on that as part of the peace process? Also, of course, part of the problem in CAR is education is not available to most youngsters, and therefore their prospects are limited, and therefore they are attracted to violence, etc., etc. I don't need to tell you this, but just the same. And even if they got education, then the question is, what kind of economic opportunities are they afforded in CAR to progress and to democratically fulfill the promise of CAR? Yeah, let me stop there.
Why don't you, yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm sure the audience is very familiar with the kind of challenges we face on the ground in MINUSCA. And one of them, I tried to describe it, was certainly the kind of discrepancy between what is expected from us and what we can really deliver on. I will simply refer to that report by Amnesty International in the fall of 2015, after another spark of violence where so many lives were lost, where Amnesty was asking the very question of about MINUSCA's mandate, mandated to protect. Is MINUSCA equipped to do so? And that's a real question. And then you have two aspects into this. One is reality. Reality is we have to do with what we have. And what we have is a lot, because it is what the Council can provide. And as I said before, and I still believe, thanks to peacekeeping, a force for good, CAR has been kind of kept together. We have contained the wars of humanity, and we have been able to ensure that this country works slowly, but maybe surely, towards a better future. It is difficult, but this is what we have. We are not in dreamland here. We have to work with what we have. And we are doing the best with what we have under extremely difficult circumstances. So nothing should be done to undermine peacekeeping, at least in countries like CAR. This is the best outfit we have to save lives. And therefore, I do hope that in a context where everything seems to indicate that there will be less and less resources devoted to peacekeeping, it's a challenge to all of us to ensure that we can have we can make a better use of what we have. Maybe we have to think, outside of the box and see what else we can do to produce better results with what we have. But it is deeply challenging. And that's why precisely the Secretary General launched, in September, is A4P initiative. And I'm glad to see that over 150 countries have, signed off on this, on the principles and engagements that A4P is offering. We are in for a better peacekeeping, which, as I said, cannot be only seen as through security lenses, but it is a whole of a UN endeavor, meaning member state endeavor, putting the primacy of politics, working to ensure that we can narrow the divergences and equipped, our forces with the best possible, well-trained, prepared troops, better equipped, having the possibilities, in a huge country like CAR, the terrain events, that we can really be flexible, nimble, and capable of going with the capacity to protect populations that are, unfortunately, on a huge territory, the size of Texas, and with no roads, no means of communications. And you want just to, I don't want to believe that peacekeeping is said to fail, but I simply say it is a challenge that we take seriously, and we're doing everything possible under extremely difficult circumstances to deliver, the peace and stability for people. But at the same time, I do acknowledge that, as I said, we do with what we have. How many clients are there ready to go for peacekeeping? The best, the most equipped nations, the best, trained soldiers are not there to deliver peacekeeping on the ground. So we do with what we have. And what we have is also the truth that sometimes, unfortunately, we don't have the right peacekeepers. But this is just, a tiny majority. The majority of our peacekeepers are absolutely heroes. They put their lives on the line, and they lost their lives simply because they want to save other people's lives. And therefore, it is hurting to see that on some occasions, we do have indeed, and what is not said, 35 soldiers in a temporary operating base, tasked to protect 20,000 people, and they got, of course, overwhelmed by an attack by an armed group that has no respect whatsoever for the rules of war or for any human dignity. And we find our soldiers, indeed, in circumstances where they just have to bunker in and protect themselves. Because soldiers, any soldier, national soldiers, UN peacekeepers, no soldier wants to die. Every soldier wants to protect himself or herself. And that's why we have to ensure that as we send soldiers in those high-risk missions, they are better really equipped, they are properly trained, and that we also can have a system where we can go very quickly to, protect them, or to have a surge capacity to ensure that they can perform the duties, to the best of their ability. And then a peacekeeping, peacekeepers cannot be firing on a mob that is coming to commit crime. We don't shoot at people. We don't do that. What is the answer? Sometimes, unfortunately, we have to be witnesses of absolutely unacceptable situations. And what we do in these situations, on these occasions, is simply to ensure that we can bring as quickly as possible more troops in order to prevent the situation from being even worse. And sometimes, unfortunately, that's what we do. But nobody is speaking about everything we do every day to save lives and to hold the country together. Nobody. It is not making headlines simply because it's a non-issue. But still, if you take this outfit out of CAR today, or any other place where we are peacekeeping, a peacekeeping mission, it will be simply chaos. Do we appreciate that? Do we understand how difficult it is? And of course, my dear friend, we do everything possible to combat misconduct. And this is, in MINUSCA, we have made it ground zero of the fight against sexual exploitation and abuse. We are the most transparent mission. We have established community-based mechanisms to ask the population to come forth and denounce any misconduct from our soldiers. And that's why we're having these numbers. And I'm very happy that in MINUSCA, it's a place where nobody can no longer hide for committing those crimes. And the backlog of crimes that we found in MINUSCA were mostly the fact of the what we call the rehatting of troops that we inherited from the region. There were soldiers before we came in, and those soldiers had nothing to do with UN requirements. And of course, we kept them because what was the priority at the time was to save lives, to ensure that we stop the bloodshed. And of course, we did it with troops that were there, deployed on the ground. And those troops did not share UN values. They were not at all under a blue helmet. And we found ourselves managing this absolutely awful situation. But as we speak today, and I do agree with you, it is still unfortunate that in spite of all the mechanisms that were put in place, we have still a tiny number, let's put it 1%, a tiny number of our soldiers, maybe even 0.5%. It's not there yet, you know, a tiny number of our soldiers who are still indulging. But, my dear, this is human being. This is human behavior. Absolutely unacceptable. We are not in the business of condemning this. And the reason why MINUSCA has been able to convince member states that we are serious about this business is simply because we have made it absolutely enemy number one. We have been speaking out. We've been conducting sensitization, effort. We've been holding patrols. We've been putting in place a system to control our own people. And all of this has helped indeed reduce drastically the number of sexual exploitation and abuse. And if there are any mismatch in the numbers that are on the public website, this can be simply corrected. But we are not in a business of hiding anything. On the contrary, we want to go out. And our approach is very simple. In case of doubt, we side with the victims, because we want to make it a victim-centered approach. It is absolutely unacceptable that in a context of peacekeeping, in a place where people are really hurting, that any peacekeeper could find any excuse to indulge in such absolutely unacceptable behavior. So this is what is happening in MINUSCA today, and I want to take you on that road. I want you, absolutely, let's talk about those things. I want you to be part of that fight. And we want to make it clear that if human flesh is weak, unfortunately, the measures we put in place will sanction in the most severe manner. But you know also the business. The Secretary General, with all the powers he has, he cannot sanction any of the perpetrators, any of the peacekeepers who have committed this kind of abuse. It will be upon member states to deploy the national investigators, officers, and we work with them. We have now made it a requirement that those investigations will be taken together with our OIOS office so that we can partner with them and make sure that every violation will be properly investigated to establish the facts on the ground. So this is what we're doing, my dear. And we are not at all in the business of hiding anything because it's simply unacceptable.
Great. Thanks so much, Parfait. We've got time for one more round. In the middle,
I'm sorry.
the gentleman in the middle.
I'm sorry. Youth and justice.
One moment.
CAR is a difficult place for any youth. I mean, I just heard, it's just hurting. I just wonder, how could you be 15 years old and hope for any future in a place like that? It is terrible. It is terrible. And plus, you know that CAR is one of the aid orphans. There's nothing there. We are with colleagues this morning, just to look at the humanitarian appeal. It's below world average, below. So it's not a place where assistance is outpouring. So it is really tough. And indeed, because there are no real solutions for the youth, they fall prey by all kind of criminal organizations, just for survival. And that is extremely, really sad to see. But we want to believe that with the peaceful conditions that would be, established in CAR, a country that has the potential to be a wealthy nation, they have almost everything to become a very successful nation. The leadership has been failing them forever. With the government that is in place, in a partnership they have really, they're developing with all the partners, with the UN on the ground, with the hopes that come with this peace agreement, with the national recovery plan that is being now supported by both, the EU, the World Bank, and key bilateral partners. I want to believe that there will be hope for the nation of CAR, and this should, of course, continue to be an endeavor in which all of us must be engaged. And the Deputy Secretary General will be certainly giving, some thought also into how to make goal SDG 16, to make it, a reality in CAR by pulling together all key actors, building on the momentum that has been established by this process, by this political process. Here is the time. Today is the time to really re-engage in CAR and try to make it a successful story. But and there is no reason why we should be really be pessimistic. I really am a prisoner of hope. I do believe that if we all pull together, having the chance for the time being to having a kind of a rather supportive government. I often joke with colleagues and say, I do believe that the current president is not a killer. I'm sorry. He's not interested in doing anything that would hurt further his country. On the contrary. So we have really a few stars aligning in CAR today. And I do believe that if we all pull together, today is not the time to disengage. On the contrary. We can do something, we can all together, pull together as a community of nations and partners. We can do something meaningful in CAR today.
All right, we have, that sparked a lot of hands in the room. We only have 10 minutes, so I'm only going to take 2 questions, and it's the 2 that I had seen. So the gentleman just here in the middle, and then here on the side.
Thank you very much, and it's a good pleasure to see you, SRSG, and also to share 2 years of your 3 years and a half in supporting the peace process. And actually, yes, knowing the context of CAR, actually the mission is doing an impossible job, and even doing a job beyond its mandates. Like in many locations, it's only the mission there maintaining law and order. And even I was in a very remote location in the Northeast, Power, even in case of domestic violence, the local population have no one to call but the mission. And if there is an incident like within 12 miles, it takes our soldiers at least 1 hour to reach there because there is no communication network, but also the roads are so bad. So even if the mission is strengthened, but the environment in which the mission operates make it almost impossible. So congratulations, SRSG, for what you have endured. It's a very difficult country, very difficult mission. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour être venu. My name is Joanna Meyer. I have a few quick points, and I'm interested in not just in Central African Republic, but in this conversation for the world. Have you noticed any talk about the equivalent of a Kimberley process equivalent for the extractive industries, because that might help in the longer term? Also, you mentioned that there was a case of 35 peacekeepers protecting 20,000, which harkens me back to Rwanda when this happened before. If you can say anything about that. And also, I'm interested in the peacekeeping, the change of the peacekeeping mandate, especially with regards climate change, because I don't think that's going to get any better. And I certainly don't want any mobs of people to be shot at, but I think that the peacekeeping mandate will have to be much more serious in that regard. Thank you very much. Thank you always to IPI.
Parfait, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm not sure I have much to add on your last comment. But I mean, there is no question about the fact that climate change is becoming, a major global concern, and it is indeed affecting, the livelihoods of many populations, including in the country where we are deployed. I refer to the very frustrating situation in which we often find ourselves. Think of CAR as this huge land with only 4.5 million inhabitants. At least 1 million, half of the million refugees in the neighboring countries, and nearly 600,000 are internally displaced all over the country. And those displaced people have lost everything. They really are like destitute. I mean, their only hope is to find a UN peacekeeping, outfit somewhere, and to build their lives around that temporary, base or permanent base that we represent. Usually, when those populations are under attack by these various criminal organizations and armed groups, they will just flock into the UN compound and try to seek for protection. And unfortunately, and what we have done out of a good intention was to see, given the landscape of the country and given the many flashpoints, we had no other solution but to spread our soldiers throughout the country, and with the hope that our blue helmet and our presence will be a deterrent, to protect these populations from any attacks from these awful, criminals. It's no longer working. It's no longer working, and therefore we are in a process. It's being reviewed. And what we did out of our good intentions is now working against us, because the headline will go that the UN was present and the UN did not protect, and where we know that unfortunately we're not in capacity to protect. And what we're trying to do is to reconfigure all of this and to have stronger permanent bases from which we can project, quicker, faster, and hopefully with much more, assets, so that we can, through intelligence gathering, know ahead of time, have a better intelligence as well, to have a better situational awareness and to be able to project our troops in order to prevent, those awful attacks on civilian populations. But it is a constant, endeavor, and you want to, to hope that all our soldiers, and by the way, it's a tough job for even peacekeepers, because not all soldiers have been trained, at home to protect civilians. POC is not necessarily a military endeavor. Military know how to fight and protect, their positions. So it is a difficult endeavor, but, slowly but surely we're getting there. But, I have to acknowledge that it is a very heavy lifting, work. And you got just a sense from what, our colleague has just said, knowing the terrain. It's a terrible task. But proud to do it, and proud to see that peacekeeping is really that force for good, and proud to see that the SG has given it, its highest priority. Happy to see that member states have joined him, into making F4P a tool for the world, and we hope that through the continued, effort and backing of member states, we will develop the kind of tools that will be fit for purpose, based on the threats on the ground, and so that we can provide the response that the populations need. But it is indeed very hard.
Parfait, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight and for sharing your reflections on the situation in CAR, I think on peacekeeping more broadly, and really to congratulate you on ending your very long tenure in Central African Republic at what we hope is a high point, but certainly the start of what will be a continual process of consolidating the peace in CAR. So please, thank you very much.